Hey guys, JD coming to you from Dallas, Texas today with another episode of For the Good of the Game. We have a really special guest today. I'm excited to present the, in my humble opinion and many opinions statistically and athletically, the all-time best receiving fullback in the history of the National Football League. Larry Centers is with us. Larry was born in Tyler, Texas. He hails from Stephen F. Austin as Lumberjacks is right, Coach? Yeah,
right.
Stephen F. Austin University. And then played in the league for 14 years, predominantly with the Cardinals. And we're going to get to all of that. But I just, Coach, I really wanted to say thanks for taking the time. I know you're a busy guy and you've got your own business interests, and we'll plug those at the end of this, talk a little bit about that. But really appreciate you taking the time, you know, on a busy time of the year to be able to come down and spend a little time with us here today. So welcome to the program, and we appreciate you being here.
Happy to be here. It's an honor.
Yeah, I know that, we were talking off camera about, you were exploring the opportunity to get into a little bit of this. So hopefully this might be a good experience. Hopefully some things that would be positive and not too many things you want to avoid that we did wrong. But we're really excited. I want to give you a few minutes to kind of talk about a little bit of your journey in football starting off. So from whenever you actually first realized, hey, this is a pretty good game, to the point at which maybe you went to Stephen F., How did that journey go along as a young football player?
Well, I started out playing Little League football in the 5th grade and played at a little town called Longview, about 2 hours east of here. And, kind of scared when I first started playing. It didn't feel too good when I hit people or when I got hit. But came from a football background, football family. My brothers played, my cousins played. So got an opportunity to play early. Played all the way through until went to Forest Park Middle School, Longview High School, played there for 2 years. Ended up not playing my junior season. I got kicked off the team for missing a study hall and decided I wasn't going to play football anymore. And got a job as a dishwasher at a local restaurant and went to the games on Fridays when I had a Friday off. And I was sitting in the stands watching guys that I had played against in Little League, listening to the people talk about how good these players were, thinking to myself that, hey, I was just as good, but, nobody will ever know it sitting up here in the stands. So my mother was an administrator in a neighboring school district. So my parents decided to move, and my younger brother and I moved with her, got a chance to play one year varsity ball at Tatum High School, the Tatum High School Eagles, and had a great season. We went deep into the playoffs. We only lost one game the whole season. Had a guy from Marshall named Bubba Murph who knew my mom and knew my older brother had gone to the University of Arkansas. Mm-hmm. And he knew a guy who was coaching at Stephen F. Austin named Lynn Graves. So he contacted me. And he recruited me down to Stephen F. Austin. I was recruited by several junior colleges and really thought about going the JUCO route for a while, but really wanted to go to Texas Tech or Baylor, but they were kind of hemming and hawing and really didn't want to offer me anything. Lynn Graves was offering me 4-year scholarship. He said, son, we're going to offer you a scholarship, a 4-year scholarship. Anything else you get down here, you got to earn it. And that statement alone kind of sealed the deal for me. I'm a guy that likes to put half the pressure here and put half the other pressure on this shoulder, and let's see if I can carry the load.
That's awesome. So you talked about, you want to take part of the chip on one shoulder and part on the other and make it happen. A hard-working, hard-nosed guy. Do you think ultimately that him making that offer to you at that point in the manner in which he did kind of put it over to the top and looking back, you look back with no regrets? You think that was the right decision?
I mean, in retrospect, yes. And, I'm very leery when I look back about things that have happened in my past to change anything because, you change one thing and we're not sitting here now. So
that's right. The
so
butterfly
I try to, as they say, though, count it all joy. Everything that happens, you either, grow from it or even if you don't succeed the first time, you grow or you learn something. So, I heard a quote the other day, experience brings knowledge, and knowledge brings confidence, and confidence brings success. And so if you look at things in that order, then they usually work out pretty good.
Now, do you think that the year you spent working and sitting in the stands hearing those people talk, and having the perspective of knowing some of the guys on the field. Did that also contribute to a little bit of that inner drive, you think?
Absolutely. Absolutely. When I look back at it, again, I had played against some of those guys since Little League. Remember I told you I started in the 5th grade.
Right.
And so I had competed against those guys and had some success against them. But here I am in the stands. Now I'm no longer a player, and I'm looking at the way that these people are looking at these guys as being great. And in my own mind, I'm thinking, hey, I'm just as good. I just, nobody ever know with me sitting in the stands. So that kind of fueled my desire to get back on the field.
It's interesting because I experienced a similar situation and sat out a year when I was a youngster, and I think that there's definitely you don't know that there's this latent love for the game inside of you, but once you've played, to me that's what it was anyway. It sounds like you had a little of that same feeling. It says there's something in you that's got to come out. Now I certainly wasn't nearly as talented as what you were, but it was. I think that it does. It provides that inner drive as opposed to external motivation, which can go away.
Right.
So you get to Stephen F. and obviously a lot of people there have been many success stories in the NFL coming out of smaller schools. I guess technically Stephen F. is considered now what we would call FCS. Is it one? What used to be old 1AA?
Yeah, it's 1AA.
Yeah, 1AA. So whether the expectations are just lower because people are so used to being around listening to and hearing and seeing the Power 5 conferences, they don't realize in those circles what kind of talent is on some of those teams. So kind of describe that journey through Stephen F. and that collegiate career that you had while you were there.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head by saying that, when you step away from it, you learn that you have a love for the game that has to come from within. And as you mentioned, as opposed to those external forces that may change, when you're building a desire from the inside out, you're always going to pretty much stay consistent with your motivation. And I had, coming from a smaller school, I didn't know how I was going to match up with the guys at the collegiate level. Just like any young kid, I didn't know. I was apprehensive about it. Thought that they were going to be much better than they were, talent-wise across the board. But when I got there, probably the first week or so, I told my roommate, I said, hey, man, I'm going to the pros. Like the first week that I got to Stephen F. after watching the talent level, not to say anything negative about my teammates.
Right.
But I just expected so much more on a talent level. I kind of built up this idea in my head that these guys were going to be world beaters. And when I got there, I'm looking around, and the same thing actually happened to me when I got to the next level and went to the pros. I felt pretty much the same way.
Do you think that had you ever experienced in your own mind prior to that moment when you told your roommate, hey, I'm going to the pros, had you ever really had a thought? I mean, all of us probably do when we were younger in the backyard throwing the ball, but had you ever really had a goal of I'm going to get to the NFL?
Yes, I jokingly said it. I grew up in a football family, as I mentioned. My grandmother was probably one of the biggest Cowboys fans ever, and used to, after church on Sundays, I used to lay on the floor in front of her TV and watch the games and listen to her coach them up.
That's awesome.
She coached them just as hard when they won as she did when they lost. So, so I kind of got that and got that teaching early, and I thought I could make it to the pros. I mentioned it. How just as a young kid, I think we all do that at some point.
Sure.
Think that you can do it. But
well, at what point when you were at Stephen F., I want to make a kind of a juxtaposition. You talk about the fact that, again, no disrespect intended to any teammates or anything, but with the expectations that you had built up in your own mind, that level of competition and talent didn't necessarily measure up to what you had imagined. As you went through your career at Stephen F. prior to getting drafted, did you always kind of feel like that propelled you forward? That thought, I've got to work that much harder because I want to continue to be better than the average competition. I
mean, no doubt about it. Even when I'm working out, when I'm preparing to go into training camp, for instance, from any one given year, in my own mind, I prepare against an opponent that I think is almost unbeatable, and that fuels my, my desire to go out and take myself to the limit. So, it's just a way of challenging myself, I guess, internally, as you mentioned. Because I have a desire to win, and I absolutely have a distaste for losing, and it doesn't feel good.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've heard more than one athlete and business people too, but I've used a form of the quote. It's not so much that I need to win, but it's that I absolutely hate to lose more than I need to win.
Yes, it's a combination of the two, and I think the driving forces fluctuate from time to time depending on the situation that you're in at the moment.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I work with Dr. Gary Russell has a group called the Winning Profile, and they talk about the fact that when that motivation needs to come from within. There needs to be an internal energy that drives you because, and as a young man in particular, I was always very much motivated by the external, the great song or, something that was more visceral that you feel. But the reality is you can go a lot further and get a lot more done if you can master that inner beast, and really set that drive. So you get drafted and you come into the league and it had, I guess, kind of a maybe by some people's standards, based on the way you finished your career, maybe what would be called a little bit of a slow start. But you started out and I guess the second year was a little bit better and kind of built from there. I was blown away going back, and of course I saw you play, but going back and looking at some of your highlights, I guess the part that stood out to me was the degree, not only the great hands, but the degree of toughness that you exhibited. Now, is a little bit of that drive coming through in the way that you ran behind your pads, the way that you would take the punishment to the defensive player as you were running the ball?
Absolutely. All my coaches have always said, at the point of contact, be the hammer and not the nail.
Mm-hmm.
And so you want to deliver the blow, and I mentioned in Little League, I didn't like getting hit at all. And either way, it's going to hurt a little bit. So you might as well deliver the punishment rather than receive it.
Absolutely. It's interesting because I've told a lot of parents that have timid kids, and not that you were necessarily timid, but I think we all feel initially, you feel that reservation, is that you can take an aggressive kid and teach them how to play anything, specifically tackle football, but you can't coach aggression into a kid. And I see that mistake being made a lot of times at the younger levels. You kind of let a kid grow into it, kind of like you talked about you did. It wasn't a real comfortable feeling, but you kind of got used to it. I really appreciate the perspective of the hammer and not the nail. I grew up in high school and college playing quarterback, so I was, I never shied away from contact, but I also was in a position where I wasn't having to deliver the blows very often, and I think that's one thing that you, as a football player and as a fan, and then knowing you and having seen you coach and stuff, it's really cool to look back on it through those lenses and then really kind of take a short-term view. When you think back on the college career, do you necessarily have a seminal moment or maybe a coach that stands out in your mind that kind of drove you forward, or something that happened that really pushed you prior to getting to the NFL?
Well, one thing comes to mind when you ask that question. Had a guy named Jim Ferguson who was a receivers coach, and he was also, turned out to be a good friend. He was a younger coach at the time. He was a tennis coach also, and I took tennis. And we were talking after a class, and I said, Coach, man, this is my freshman year. I said, Coach, I'm a little frustrated, man. They're not playing me. He said, make them play you. I said, what do you mean? He said, make them play you. Go out, when you practice full speed. Make it practice in such a way that they know, the coaches, the people making that decision, they look crazy for not playing you, like based on how you practice, how you improve, and how you approach your craft. And that conversation kind of lit a fire under me, and I stopped worrying about not being on the field. I started worrying about what it took to get onto the field, and that helped me a lot.
That's phenomenal. Cal Newport wrote a book that I read recently called "So Good They Can't Ignore You," and that's exactly that philosophy. And that opens my eyes a little bit now, looking at your career, Because it's, I think a lot of people focus on the receptions because it's not always that, I mean, face it, reality. One, we've gotten away from fullbacks in the NFL, and even at the college level, across the board. But you don't typically look to your fullback to be one of your better receivers. He's going to have to block, he's going to have to toe the load, and then tote the rock in tough situations. So I think that that facet of your inner drive, it comes through in just watching you and the way you run and perform. So when you get drafted and you get into the league, how did it compare? You went through the experience at Stephen F. with the expectations were a little bit higher than what the reality was you dealt with. How did that transfer when you stepped up? Because now you got this guy who told his roommate, "Hey, I'm going pro."
Yeah.
And you certainly must have had some expectations about what you were going to find when you got into the NFL as well. How did that work out?
Well, very similar to my expectations being, higher when I went to college. Everybody knows that, we're playing with grown men now when you get to the pros. And, I don't want to, I knew a bunch of people back home who had an excuse for why they didn't make it. The coach didn't like me, my agent screwed me, or, the situation, I got hurt, or I had a kid, or whatever, the list goes on and on. When you start making excuses, anything fits in the blank.
Absolutely.
And so I kind of made up in my mind that when I got there, if I came home, it was going to be because I wasn't good enough. It wasn't going to be because I didn't work and I didn't do my part. And I remember, asking God to just give me the ability to play at that level, and I'll do the work, and it worked out. I went out, and it didn't work out right off the bat. Arizona drafted 4 running backs the year I came in, so so the competition was pretty fierce. I didn't play early. I thought I was going to get cut. Didn't even play in the last preseason game, so I just knew, man, I'm out of here. I kind of had my head down a little bit, but made the team. They liked me. I, again, went back out on scout team. I wasn't playing at all. I was inactive every week. But when I went out on scout team, that was my game day. I went out and I gave it to our first team defense, talked trash to them. And, again, with the philosophy of be so good that they can't ignore you. I got scout team player of the week every week almost when I was a rookie. And finally, toward the end of the year, they started letting me get in on special teams and got out there, made some plays, and bided my time by playing special teams, and finally got an opportunity to get on the field and made the most of it.
I got to tell you, it does my heart good to hear you say that, and not because it's at the NFL and it's coming from a guy I respect and I know had a great career, but because so many young people need to hear that at every level. And the same is true. It doesn't matter what level you're playing at. If you can muster the courage and the drive to be so good they can't ignore you, it'll eventually come around, and I truly believe that so many kids nowadays miss that point. They get so caught up in, because of the social media crazy world we live in.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that, we live in as you say, a microwave society, where people don't know that there's a price and a process, a price to be paid and a process to endure before you get to realize your dreams. So
let me ask you, and I want to go into this. I'm gonna bring up a highlight video, and I'm just gonna play it muted so that we can talk a little bit while we do it. But what starting in year 2, you go through what you just described with scout team player of the week, and you get in on special teams. Going into year 2, what had you focused in on at that point that you learned from that first year to say, man, my off season is going to be spent doing X, Y, and Z? What did you focus on?
Well, I focused on pass protection. I talked to the head coach about, my playing time. And he's like, you'll probably get on the field faster than you realize if you just work on your pass pro. And so I went to work on that and, became really proficient in protecting the passer. I knew what the linemen were doing, and I knew blitzes. I knew, where the pressure was coming from, and I excelled in that area. And as a result, that helped me get onto the field during passing situations. And as, things would go, a few passes came my way. And, made the most of them, had some yak, some rack, run after the catch,
Right.
and yards after the catch, and they started going to me. I started being a guy that the quarterback started looking for, and I'm real proud of. I had great hands. I thought going in. I went into Stephen F as a receiver.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, I had an opportunity to go in as a DB, a receiver, or a running back, and I chose receiver and broke my pinky, and as a result, I went to scout team running back and started playing running back. But then when I got to the pros, I started playing running back and ended up catching the ball more. So can't make this stuff up, man.
Yeah, I know.
But
it all comes full circle.
But again, beyond it all, the biggest thing is make the most of every opportunity. That's my philosophy, and I like to think that I was able to do that.
Well, I tell you, it was funny because I started looking several weeks ago, and then the last few days, and we were preparing for this, starting to read and kind of look through, and that's when I told you before we came on camera. I kind of backed off of what I originally was going to do because I started watching some of the highlights, and interestingly, there were one or two plays that I vaguely actually remember seeing when they happened, but several things impressed me, and I wanted to ask you about the work regimen when you would go into this. You obviously, I've said it already. You were known as being a tough runner anyway. You ran behind your pads, as they say. You were going to deliver the blow. The way you put it, being the hammer, not the nail. But just the degree of how you were gifted with a soft touch and being able to receive the ball in many different, body positions and angles while you're running and stuff, and then turning around and, as you said, yak or rack, yard after the catch, and then immediately shifting from that, okay, now I'm receiver, the ball's secure, now I'm going to take it on and hit somebody. Did you make it a focus of your off-season workouts or even during the year? Now, I'm not talking drills, but what did you do individually to make sure each aspect and facet of your game improved?
Just learn from every experience. I practiced hard.
Mm-hmm.
I practiced so hard at times that the games were really easy. And I know that sounds crazy, but I put myself to the test during practice. I mean, I would catch the ball and run. We would be at our own 20. If I got the ball, I would run all the way to the end zone almost every play and try to run all the way back before the next play is called. And that was a form of conditioning. And what I learned with that is it helped me in so many different ways. Number one, conditioning, and number two, tempo, and just understanding the speed of the game, making the game slow down for you when it's actually game time.
Man, I've heard the technique in terms of catching. In fact, I think probably the other guy that is noted for that is Jerry Rice, because he always, he would take the ball all the way down, just like you described. One, I think that's genius from a conditioning standpoint. But two, it absolutely leads to setting the stage for leadership on the team, because you're setting an example that others can follow. And certainly, I guarantee if they didn't ever say it, they were looking up to you for it. But also the tempo piece, I had never thought about that. That's just genius. I mean, I was never in a position to do that, as a player, but I love that aspect of it. When you go back through this, what type of stuff, what was going through your mind in some of these situations where, you were on the field making those natural moves, as it were?
Well, again, the game, you deal with what you see in front of you. A lot of times, because you've practiced it a lot, or you've seen the situation, you just react more than you make a decision.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times it was just feel, just wanting to push the ball upfield, wanting to maximize every opportunity. The guys on the other side of the ball, they get paid too. So sometimes you're not going to win all of them, but you definitely go into it with the attitude that you're going to win every single one of them. So that's kind of how I approach the game every game. I went into every game knowing at the highlight of my career, went into every game understanding that I'm going to make plays. I'm going to make plays. If they get me the ball, I'm going to make plays. I don't know how it's going to happen, but I will make plays. And so with that attitude, just, once you get it in your hands, go forward. Anybody's in the way, hey, it's their problem.
Yeah, I love that attitude, and I love the several things that you've in the last few minutes that you've talked about that I would highlight for any young players that might be looking at this. It's not arrogance if you back it up. So when you have confidence in yourself and you know that you have the work ethic and the drive to go out and turn something into an opportunity, and that you know you can work to overcome the mistakes that are going to happen, the downfalls that are going to happen, I think that that's the kind of guidance that you would want, any young kid, whether it's our own kids or a kid we might be coaching, to take to the bank. And I appreciate so much that came through in this interview, but also it now just sitting here talking to you, it really opens my eyes to so much more to appreciate what I see on the screen when I look at your highlights, because it really defines you as a player looking through that lens. When you look back at your pro career, it's interesting because I was telling Julie before we started talking, I know several other players who happen to win Super Bowl rings later in their career, and it can be a circumstance, it can be the right time and the right place, it can be a number of things. What do you see as you go through and look back? The bulk of your career spent with the Cardinals, really making bank, if you will, not talking about the money side of it, but from a talent standpoint, and then playing for those three other teams, and then ending with the Super Bowl run with the Patriots. What did you pull from all of that previous success that got you to that point and really helped you capitalize on that opportunity?
Well, never quit. Never quit. And I knew this when I was playing with the Cardinals, or I felt that, as a fan of the game, remember I was a little kid watching the game. This is an honor to be out here on the field. I'm in the pros. Actually, I used to look around and just think to myself, look at all the people in the stands and say, hey, I'm here. I'm in the pros. And so, I'm not really worried as much about what's on the scoreboard, because I can only control one piece of that. Through my approach, through my attitude, through, I only have one little piece that I can control. One person can't do it all. And so you have to put it all together. And main thing is just do your job. Do what you can do, and try not, as much as you can help it, try not to let the other stuff get you too down if it's not going the way you want it to go.
Now, in your career, did you run into guys, maybe even guys you tried to help, that you saw going down the wrong road because vanity got in the way or they got mad? And
I mean, it's a matrix of things that, you got egos, you got attitude, you got, all kind of stuff, all kind of moving parts. But, as they say, put your mask on first and then help those people around you. So I had to make sure that I was taking care of what I had to take care of, with the understanding that, I tried to encourage guys along the way, but I was never really a talkative guy a lot. I don't really like to rah when I was playing. I think the people who do all the talking, they're still trying to make their minds up, and just go out and get it done and lead by example. In preparation, on and off the field, try to be a good guy. I like to think that I was a great teammate. What was your question?
No, you pretty much answered it. I think you've kind of demonstrated a couple of different ways, and certainly in when people can see what the tail of the tape, as they say, is you were kind of guy that reported for work. You picked up your lunchbox, you reported for work, you did your job, and did it to the very best of your ability, and went home at the end of the day feeling good about that.
Absolutely, and they pay coaches to coach, they pay players to play, and so I went out and I tried to go out and earn my paycheck every week. I never wanted to walk back in the door and have to not be able to look the people in the eye when I picked up my check. So I like to think I was a pretty good pro and pretty good player.
I'm going to run through some random questions here at the end. I kind of I refer to it as the 2-minute drill, but just because that's appropriate for football.
All right.
When you look back at your starting in the 5th grade, you look back at the youth football. Did you have a specific coach that you remember, or team you played on, that was kind of seminal in your mind, that really helped push you forward? Something that really stands out in your mind that was a marquee moment.
It wasn't a coach, But a moment that stands out was I took an automotive technology class in high school, and it was taught by a guy who was an ex-Marine, and he was a little squirrely guy, but he was mean, and you couldn't even get a crack. You couldn't get him to crack. Could never get him to crack a smile. But he took a liking to me, and he took me under his wing, and he encouraged me to run for office for the Vocational Clubs of America deal for president of our region. And he said, go home and make a speech. And I went home and I made a speech and wrote it out. And then he made me stay after class one day. And he said, say your speech. And I said it. He said, memorize it. I memorized it and I said it to him. He said, no, say it again. Say it again. Say it again. When I thought I knew it, he made me say it again. He made me prepare, or he encouraged me to prepare on that speech to the point where I could say that speech backwards if I needed to. I knew it word for word. I knew it cold. And when I delivered the speech, I nailed it. And I got a big ovation, and I won by a landslide. And that moment, that experience, that teaching me that there's another level of preparation, a whole nother level of preparation that a lot of people never really understand. I think that was one of the things that stands out in terms of helping me, develop into the player that I ultimately became.
That's such a tremendous story. It really is, especially because it's not centered in football. When you get beyond high school and got to college, was there a specific play or game that stands out in your mind at Stephen F. that you think back on and say, man, that was sweet?
Several. First of all, I've developed a thing early in my college career. I found out who made the films, who got the films ready, and I wanted to know when it was ready. And I went and watched it as soon as I could possibly physically get it and watch it. I sat down by myself and watched the tape. Mm-hmm. You know how you see it looking through your helmet, but you don't know how it looks from the eye in the sky.
Right.
And so being able to, as quickly as I could, marry those two perspectives together helped me develop my game. But to answer your question, there was a play against Grambling. I think we played against Grambling, and it was a catch over the middle. And I caught the ball and did a spin move back to the inside, but there was a guy coming from the inside I saw him when I was spinning, and as soon as my foot hit the ground, I just planted it, and the guy just went right by me. And, it was just, I didn't plan it. It's just, it was like dancing. And that stands out to me.
It's crazy because on that little highlight reel we just looked at, the very first play is you take the ball and you go off. It's kind of a off guard / tackle type play on the left, and you did a jump cut where you jumped off your right foot, but your right foot was the first one to come down again, and it was like, man, that dude flew when he was going sideways. It was, and those kinds of things you can't teach that. That kind of stuff just happens. It's a natural reaction. I never did it, but well, kudos to you.
Well, you're being able to, react with your body, what your eyes see and anticipate, and being able to keep them in concert with one another, I think is the key to that. And again, that comes from practice and experience and having seen it before. You just end up doing it without thinking about it.
But it's crazy that the lesson that the teacher taught you early on was it kind of permeated everything you did in terms of setting the stage for that success. And that makes perfect sense.
It does. You can eliminate, and my philosophy is you can eliminate a good percentage of your opponents just by outworking them. They may be more talented, but you can eliminate them literally through just hard work, dedication, studying, knowing what you're doing, understanding what you got going on, what you're faced with.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have any single favorite or favorite group of non-football activities nowadays?
Pool.
Really?
Billiards. Yeah, I like to say I don't play pool. I play billiards. But
sounds a little more classy.
Yeah, it's It's a way to be, again, introspective. The challenge comes from within. You can't physically play defense against your opponent. You can position it to where it's defense, but you can't physically, when it's his turn to shoot or your opponent's turn to shoot, then it's completely out of your hands. But when it's your turn, you have complete control over what happens, and I enjoy that aspect of the game.
That's an awesome piece. It's a good insight into kind of your competitive personality and how that carryover from, obviously being a football player goes into something like shooting pool, playing billiards. That's really neat. What about if nobody's around looking, what kind of favorite snack food you like grabbing if you're by yourself?
Probably a Snickers. I like the little bite size, but got to be careful because once I eat one, then I got to stop myself somewhere along the way.
Kind of like the old Lay's potato chip.
Exactly.
Nobody can eat just one.
Exactly. So, yeah I enjoy those.
I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about what you're working on now. You had described earlier the business opportunity to the extent that you want to. Kind of talk a little bit about what you're branching out into nowadays. Tell us about that.
I do a little bit of everything. I co-founded this company called Core Sports and Entertainment, where we try to help players keep their names relevant. Every player is famous at least 3 places: where they're from, where they played college ball, and where they played in the pros. And kind of like we're doing now, I think it's always good to sit down and have these types of conversations because you gain so many different things from other guys' perspective. So we're helping guys with, resurrect their careers or their likenesses or images. We do a comedy show at the Super Bowl every year. This past year was the 4th year that we've done it. It's gone over really good. We had Ed Too Tall Jones, Flozell Adams, Steve Berline. We've had Bubby Brister, and the list goes on. We've had a bunch of players to come in and participate. We have a panel where we get up and a guy has to convince the crowd that a little known fact about a player on the panel is about them. So each guy has to lie to the crowd and make it convincing. I'm working on a personal website. Ultimately what I want to do is I want to develop a website where I can put conversations like the one we're having and do snippets, and ultimately I want an online store where I sell memorabilia and ball cases and that type of thing. I have this pipe dream of creating a system to where I create commemorative game balls for Little League football players. Rather than a participation trophy, everybody gets a game ball instead. So that's one of my pipe dreams.
That's really cool. I think it's always interesting to me to not only obviously learn something new. Every time I sit down with one of these conversations, I learn something about the people, but it's also cool that you learn something about not just the player, but the game and the perspective. I think that's probably the most important piece is you said it a minute ago, you really gain it a little bit different perspective and seeing the world through their lens. David Diaz-Infante famously called it my life through a face mask. Yeah. And, I love that perspective. So I genuinely gain from every time we do this. And I think that the cool thing is for the good of the game was not something that we just came up with. I mean, 70% of kids in the United States nowadays stop playing youth sports by the age of 13. And my goal is to do everything I can, along with several other organizations that I'm trying to help and partner with, to drive that down, because I think sports, not just football, but my passion is football, is so important. And to hear the life lessons, not just it's done through a football lens, but the life lessons that you learned, that you talked about, and what you applied is so important for those young people to hear, and young parents too. Yeah. It really is. So thank you from top to bottom for taking the time to come in, and especially because we hadn't seen each other in a long time. It's great to see you again. And I just appreciate what you were able to accomplish. Congratulations on an awesome career, and certainly good luck going forward with what you're working on now.
Well, thank you. As I mentioned, it's an honor and a pleasure. Always great to catch up, and anytime you need me, I'm here.
Well, I appreciate it, Larry. Thanks very much. Listen, guys, this was a really eye-opening interview for me, and every time, as I said, I learned something, but I really want the young players that may see this to take that perspective and run with it. Talk that inner drive, the lessons that Larry talked about, and what you can do to turn that into success. you got to be consistent. You got to be willing to outwork your opponent. You have to be willing to do those things that other people aren't ready to do or willing to do in order to achieve that long-term success. And arguably a 14-year career, and certainly by my standards and a lot of others, being the all-time best receiving fullback in the history of the NFL is not a shabby title to wear. So in addition to that Super Bowl ring he's got on his right hand right now, there's a lot of other accolades, but more so the look inside at the person and the great guy that he is. So I want to thank Larry again. Just remember, if you're out there, make sure you're subscribing to the podcast. I hope that you'll come back and see us soon. And when you're out there doing stuff for football, remember, do it for the good of the game. Take care. See you later.